In the beginning, there was no dogma, no temple, no creed to contain the vastness of spirit. There was only law, silent, immutable, infinite. The very architecture of the universe, waiting to be understood. In a world divided by rituals, symbols, and clashing traditions, the voice of one man rises from the stillness of pure thought. Thomas Troward, judge, mystic, and visionary, leads us on a journey that transcends the borders of conventional faith. This is not a book against religion. It is a journey beyond it, towards that which lies beneath all forms, the universal law of being. Prepare to leave behind the confines of inherited belief, to step beyond the threshold of dogma and into the majestic realm of true understanding. For the one who knows the law knows God, not as a mystery, but as principle. The mind of man has long been restless before the mystery of its own existence. It has questioned its origin, its purpose, and above all, that primary cause that brought it into being. In its attempt to understand, it has woven countless conceptions of divinity, each trying to capture within its limited scope the true essence of that which has no form or beginning. Thus were born religions that, far from providing a pure and undistorted revelation, have constructed systems of dogma that have rather obscured the fundamental truth. God is not a being separate from man, but the very principle that operates in his mind and through his existence. The predominant idea that has dominated humanity for centuries has been of an external God, a supreme being who watches from above, dispensing favors and punishments according to criteria unknown to reason. This conception, although understandable within primitive thought, has given rise to superstitions, unfounded fears, and blind submission that has denied man his rightful heritage as an individualized expression of the universal mind. The purpose of this treatise is none other than to correct this fundamental misunderstanding, restoring to the reader's mind the understanding of its true relationship with the creative principle. God is not a being separate from man. He is life itself within him, the intelligence that guides his thought, the force that animates his existence. Throughout these pages, it will be clearly shown how the human mind is not an isolated phenomenon, but an extension of the universal mind. Thought is not a mere internal process without consequences. It is the instrument by which the first cause acts in the world of form. Man, in his state of ignorance, has considered his thought as a purely subjective matter, failing to recognize that within it resides the very power that set the universe in motion. When this truth is understood in its full magnitude, the need for temples and altars disappears. God is no longer sought in the heavens or in the scriptures of men, but within one's own consciousness, where he has always been, the thinker and the supreme cause. Every manifestation in the visible world is the result of an invisible principle. Just as the architect conceives in his mind the structure before it takes shape in stone, so the entire universe is the expression of an intelligence that underlies all that exists. There is no chaos or chance in creation. There is law and order, and this law operates with mathematical precision through directed thought. Here lies the great secret that has been hidden, whether through ignorance or convenience. Thought is the key to creation. Since the human mind is an extension of the universal mind, man possesses the same creative power within himself, although due to lack of knowledge he rarely uses it with full awareness. But if thought is the cause of all manifestation, how is it possible that man, endowed with such a powerful creative faculty, has fallen into impotence and dependence on an external divinity? The answer is simple. He has been conditioned to believe in his separation from the source. He has been taught to see himself as a servant rather than a creator, as a subject rather than an individualized expression of supreme intelligence. This treatise seeks to strip human thought of those false limitations and restore the understanding of the real relationship between the thinker and the supreme cause. It is not a mere philosophical speculation, but an exact science based on immutable principles that can be demonstrated by anyone who applies them with knowledge and precision, beyond religion towards the understanding of law. When God is spoken of in religious terms, one inevitably falls into the domain of belief and dogma. But the true understanding of God requires neither blind faith nor rituals. It requires knowledge of the law that governs thought and creation. Religions have tried to represent this truth through symbols, but over time, the symbols have been taken as realities themselves, and the principle forgotten. The aim of this treatise is to recover the principle, restoring to man his original power. God is not a distant judge nor an anthropomorphic figure who intervenes in human affairs at will. God is pure mind, absolute intelligence, operating through every human being. The only difference between a man who experiences the fullness of his creative power and one who lives in the misery of ignorance is his understanding of this truth. Thus, the invitation presented in these pages is not to believe, but to understand. Not to accept blindly, but to apply with discernment the principles of mental science. It is not a new religion nor a system of beliefs. It is the discovery of a law that has always existed and will always operate, regardless of whether man recognizes it or not. This knowledge is what allows true liberation. For when man understands that there is no separation between his mind and the universal mind, he no longer needs intermediaries or dogmas. He himself is the temple, he himself is the altar, and his thought is the prayer that shapes his destiny. If these words resonate within the reader, it is because within him already exists a latent recognition of this truth. It is not something new, but something that has always been there, waiting to be remembered. Therefore, may this treatise serve as a lamp that illuminates the path back to the understanding of the unity between God and the human mind. Here begins the journey, God and the Human Mind Beyond Religion, by Thomas Troward. We have noticed that more than 90% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to keep creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1. God as Principle and Not as Person. The conception of God as a personal entity with human attributes and fluctuating emotions has been one of the most persistent ideas in the mind of humanity. Since ancient times, man has projected his own traits onto divinity, imagining it as a supreme being who observes, judges, punishes, and rewards according to criteria often unknown to reason. This vision, although useful for the understanding of primitive peoples, is a fundamental limitation that obscures the true nature of the creative principle. God is not a being with a defined form, nor an arbitrary will that intervenes in human affairs at whim. God is principle, and like every principle, is immutable, universal, and eternal. Just as the law of gravity does not choose whom it affects nor changes according to circumstances, the divine law operates with absolute precision, responding to conditions set by the individual's mind. The error of institutionalized religion has been to present God as an external entity separate from man's own consciousness. It has been taught that God dwells in the heavens, is apart from his creation, and can only be accessed through mediators and specific rites. But the truth is diametrically opposed to this conception. God is not a distant being, but the very principle that gives rise to existence, the universal intelligence, the underlying foundation of all manifestation. If we observe the universe with the eyes of a rational thinker, we notice precise order in all things. From the structure of the stars to the symmetry of a flower, from the mathematics that govern nature to the laws of thought, all respond to an organizing principle. This principle is what we call God. It is not a blind force nor an impersonal energy without direction, but a supreme intelligence that permeates all that exists. Its highest expression is found in the capacity for conscious thought, for it is in the mind where this principle reaches its fullest manifestation. Just as electricity is an invisible principle until expressed in a lit lamp, so too is God a principle that becomes evident only through conscious mind. The difference between one who experiences the fullness of life and one who suffers under ignorance does not lie in the arbitrariness of a God who favors some and punishes others, but in the degree of understanding of the universal law. Whoever understands that their thought is the channel through which external conditions manifest, adjusts their mind to the harmony of supreme intelligence, and thus experiences order, progress, and fulfillment. The human mind is the vehicle through which God expresses. The most important point to understand is that the individual's mind is not an isolated system, but an extension of the universal mind. Thus, every thought is an act of creation, for the same law that originated worlds is operating within man's mind. This is a truth that most have overlooked. Each individual is a center of expression of universal intelligence. There are no limits to their power except those they impose themselves through ignorance or false beliefs inherited from erroneous doctrines. When man thinks, he is shaping the primordial substance of the universe. His thought is not an ephemeral phenomenon without consequences. It is an organized force projected into reality with the same exactness that a seed once sown in fertile soil will bear fruit according to its nature. Thus, one who understands that their mind is the vehicle of creation no longer waits for external forces to change their destiny, but assumes their power and directs their thought with precision and purpose. Superstition dies the moment it is recognized that God is not an arbitrary being, but a living and operative law that responds with mathematical exactness to the mental condition of the individual. This understanding is the key to transforming life. When man stops seeking God outside and recognizes him in his own thought, his existence fills with certainty. He no longer begs or pleads, but affirms and establishes, knowing that the word held with conviction is the rod of command that shapes reality. This is the knowledge that religion has obscured and that must now be restored. God is not a person to be worshipped, but the principle of being, and the human mind is the channel through which this principle manifests in the world. Whoever understands this truth and applies it in their life will see the transformation of their destiny, for they will have ceased to consider themselves a creature subject to chance and will have taken their rightful place as a creator being with the universal mind. This is the first step in understanding mental science. From here on, we will deepen how universal intelligence individualizes in each human being and how the recognition of this fact is the key to mastery over life. Chapter 2. The Universal Mind and its Expression in the Individual. Human thought, in its tendency to classify and separate, has made the mistake of considering the individual mind as an autonomous faculty, disconnected from the first cause of all things. But just as the ocean cannot be divided into fragments, without each drop still containing the essence of the whole, the mind of man is not an isolated entity, but an individualized expression of the universal mind. To fully understand this, it is necessary first to abandon any idea that the intelligence governing the universe is a force separate from the one who thinks. Everything that exists has its origin in a single principle, a universal intelligence that underlies manifestation and acts as the source of all life, order, and purpose. This unique mind is not a random phenomenon, nor a blind energy, but an active principle expressed through immutable laws. It is the first cause of all existence, the foundation upon which the structure of the universe rests, and the mechanism that shapes all that can be conceived. There is no reality outside of it, nor anything that does not come from its ordered movement. The fundamental error of the unenlightened mind is to perceive God as an external entity, when in truth, God is the organizing principle operating from within each being. The intelligence governing the growth of trees, the course of the stars, and the expansion of life is the same that manifests in human consciousness, for there are not two minds in the universe, but one, operating at different degrees of expression. There is no separation between the thinker and the supreme cause. The only difference between the universal mind and the individual mind is the degree of recognition the latter has of its origin. Man, as a focus of expression of this supreme intelligence, is not a lesser creation nor an accidental entity, but a conscious manifestation of divine law. His thought is not a phenomenon without consequences, but the tool through which the universal mind is shaped into form. Just as a seed contains within itself the potentiality of the tree, man's thought carries in its essence the creative power of supreme intelligence, and his destiny is not determined by external factors, but by how he uses this faculty that has been granted to him. Whoever understands that their mind is not theirs, in the sense of individual ownership, but a current of expression of the one mind, stops considering thought as a mere activity of the brain and recognizes it as the very principle of creation. The true understanding of thought is not to see it as a subjective process, but as the creative act of universal law operating through the individual. Here lies the difference between those who live under uncertainty and those who exercise dominion over their reality. The former believes their thoughts are mere fleeting occurrences without significance, while the latter understands that every idea held with intention is a command given to universal substance. The thinker is the point of connection between the absolute and the relative, between the unmanifest and form. He is the bridge between the universal mind and the visible world. His function is none other than to precisely direct the substance of thought so that it takes the desired form. This understanding is the threshold that separates the common man from the conscious man. It is not chance, nor predetermined fate, nor the capricious will of an external divinity that shapes existence. It is the use each individual makes of their thinking faculty, in which resides the very power of the supreme mind. Just as a river flows from the mountain to the valley, without losing its essence, the universal mind individualizes in man without fragmenting or diminishing. Each individual is a focal point of creative intelligence, a channel through which divine law unfolds in the world of form. There is no limitation, except that which the mind imposes on itself, for the fullness of universal power is present in every thought, directed with intention and certainty. Humanity's error has been not recognizing its own nature and seeking God externally. When true access to supreme intelligence is found in the understanding of the unity between the thinker and the creative principle, this union is neither symbolic nor metaphorical but a structural reality. For the individual mind is nothing other than the universal mind operating through particular consciousness. When man recognizes this, his thought ceases to be wandering and becomes the instrument by which he directs his destiny. He no longer feels separate from the first cause, nor subject to uncertainty, but assumes his role as a creator being, understanding that there is no greater power in the universe than intelligence in action through the conscious thinker. This is the point where life ceases to be a mystery and becomes an exact science. Here begins the true application of knowledge. Chapter 3. The Power of Thought in Creation. The fundamental principle governing all manifestation in the universe is that nothing exists without first having been conceived in the mind. Everything that man perceives in the physical world is but the reflection of a thought that at some point was held with sufficient intensity to take form. This law, although evident to those who study it carefully, has been ignored by most, who attribute the circumstances of their lives to external factors without recognizing their own responsibility in creating their destiny. Thought is not an activity without consequences, nor a phenomenon that occurs within the individual without relation to the outside world. On the contrary, it is the primary cause of all experience, the organizing principle that directs the invisible substance of the universe toward a definite form. The universal mind, of which every human being is an extension, operates under exact order, and that order allows no exceptions. Just as a seed planted in the earth will produce a harvest according to its species, a thought sustained in the mind will sooner or later give rise to its corresponding manifestation in the material plane. This is the fact that separates the conscious man from the man who wanders in ignorance. Whoever understands that their thought is the tool of creation no longer attributes their success or failure to luck or the intervention of external forces, but assumes control of their own mind with the certainty that directing thought is equivalent to directing reality. There is no mystery in this process. It corresponds to laws as precise as those governing the movement of the stars or the expansion of light. The difference between a directed thought and an inert thought lies in the presence of intention. Directed thought is that which is maintained with purpose, clarity, and a firm will that it will manifest in form. It is thought that, like a well-channeled current, flows powerfully toward a specific destination and generates the corresponding response in universal substance. In contrast, inert thought is that which arises without direction, focus, or the support of sustained conviction. It is a scattered thought, without creative power, which, although it exists, lacks the energy necessary to become an effective cause within the law of manifestation. The reason many consider their thought has no impact on their reality is that they have allowed their mind to operate without direction, without discipline, and without the certainty that makes an idea become concrete reality. Most individuals think erratically, jumping from one idea to another without order, allowing external influences to dictate the course of their thought instead of establishing it with purpose. In this way, they generate a flow of contradictory ideas that neutralize their creative capacity. The man who understands universal law does not allow his mind to wander uncontrolled, but disciplines it with the same precision with which an architect designs the plans of a structure. He does not let his thoughts be determined by chance or circumstances, but holds in his mind the image of what is to be, knowing that the outer form is but the reflection of his inner conviction. This principle explains why some individuals, even in adverse conditions, manage to overcome difficulties and create a life according to their purpose, while others, despite having external advantages, remain trapped in a cycle of limitation and frustration. The difference is not in their initial circumstances, but in how they use their faculty of thinking. Whoever directs their mind with intention is designing their destiny. Whoever allows their thought to be dragged by the environment is leaving their life in the hands of the forces of chaos. The manifestation of reality is not an arbitrary or mysterious process. It is the direct consequence of the conscious direction of thought. Each individual is the architect of their own existence, and the tool with which they build their world is their mind. There is no greater power in man's life than his own capacity to imagine, affirm, and hold with certainty an idea until it crystallizes into form. Whoever understands this no longer depends on external circumstances and takes command of their destiny with full assurance. They no longer ask if they will achieve what they desire, but know with certainty that thought, when sustained with clarity and without opposition, becomes the reality the thinker has conceived. This is the truth proclaimed in different forms throughout history, but only a few have known how to apply it accurately. Mental science is neither a dogma nor a speculative theory. It is the fundamental law of creation, accessible to all who dare to exercise their power through knowledge. Thought is not a mere activity of the mind, but the key that opens the doors of destiny. Just as the sun cannot cease to emit light, the mind cannot cease to manifest its content in reality. Whoever wishes to change their life must begin by changing their thought, for in it lies the seed of all manifestation. In the following chapters, we will explore how the spiritual nature of man is intrinsically linked to his capacity to think, and how the recognition of his creative power allows him to rise above the limitations imposed by ignorance and fear. The life of the individual is not the result of external forces, but the reflection of their inner world. And whoever masters their thought will master their destiny. Chapter 4. The Spiritual Nature of Man. The deepest error into which humanity has fallen is the belief in separation between God and man. Since ancient times, it has been assumed that the human being is a creature distant from its creator, a finite and limited being, subject to forces beyond its control and dependent on the will of an external divinity. This perception, although accepted by most as an unquestionable fact, is an illusion born of ignorance and reinforced by doctrines that have obscured the fundamental truth of existence. God is not a distant being, nor an entity with human attributes who judges and arbitrarily decides the lives of men. God is the creative principle, the universal mind from which everything emanates and in which everything exists. Man is not an entity separate from this mind, but its individualized expression in the plane of form. Just as each wave of the ocean contains within itself the essence of the sea, each individual carries within their being the totality of the divine principle. Whoever understands this abandons the notion that they must seek God outside themselves, and recognizes that their own consciousness is the point of access to universal intelligence. The supreme truth is not that man must approach God, but that he has never been separated from him. The distance between the Creator and his creation is a fallacy. Man is not an isolated fragment of divinity, but the individual manifestation of the universal mind on the plane of conscious existence. The I Am is not a mystical affirmation, but the declaration of a structural reality. Every time an individual recognizes their conscious existence, they affirm their unity with the creative principle. It is not a separate identity, but the projection of divine thought into form. There are not two minds in the universe, but one single mind operating on different levels of manifestation. When man says, "I am," he is expressing the same reality that sustains the cosmos, consciousness in action, intelligence that observes and creates through directed thought. This understanding dissolves the illusion of weakness and dependence. Man is not an insignificant being abandoned in a chaotic world, but a center of expression of the divine mind, endowed with the same creative power that moves the worlds. His capacity to think, imagine, and affirm is not a mere biological accident, but evidence of his origin in supreme intelligence. However, most have been taught to identify solely with their physical body, believing that their existence is limited to flesh and senses. This materialistic conception has led humanity to live in a state of self-imposed limitation, in which the mind is seen as a secondary function, rather than recognized as the guiding principle that shapes reality. But the body is not the cause of the mind, it is its consequence. Physical form is not the source of intelligence, but its vehicle of manifestation. Just as a craftsman uses tools to shape his work, the mind uses the body as an instrument to express its will in the world of form. Confusing the instrument with the Creator is a mistake. The body changes, ages, and transforms, but the consciousness that inhabits it remains immutable. The real being of man is not his physical form, but the intelligence that directs it. Understanding this truth is to transcend the limitations of material existence. Whoever identifies only with their body is bound to temporality and suffering. Whoever recognizes themselves as a manifestation of the universal mind gains access to a higher level of existence where disease, scarcity, and fear no longer hold sway over their life. The body is a reflection of the mental state, and when the mind aligns with the truth of its divine origin, the physical form responds with harmony and perfection. Here lies the secret that has been veiled for centuries. Man is not a helpless creature in a world of unpredictable forces, but the vehicle through which supreme intelligence becomes conscious of itself in creation. He's not a being separate from God, but God in individual expression. This truth has been proclaimed in many forms but rarely fully understood. It is not a metaphor nor a philosophical belief, but an immutable law. Just as light cannot be separated from the sun nor heat from fire, man's consciousness cannot be separated from the universal mind. Whoever fully assimilates this stops seeking answers externally and turns their gaze inward. The only true temple is the mind itself, and the only real communion with God is the act of thinking with purpose and direction. This knowledge is the bridge toward the transformation of life. In the following chapters, we will explore how the recognition of this unity with universal intelligence allows mastery over existence, transcending the limitations imposed by ignorance and directing destiny with absolute certainty. Man is not destined to be a spectator of his life, but the conscious creator of his reality. Chapter 5. The Universal Law and its Mathematical Precision. The universe is not a collection of random forces acting without purpose or direction. Everything that exists responds to an immutable order, to a precise mathematical structure that governs every phenomenon, from the movement of the stars to the formation of a thought in the mind of man. This order is not subject to whims or exceptions. It operates with absolute exactness, without failures or alterations. Whoever understands this truth stops seeing their life as a game of chance and recognizes that every manifestation responds to a universal law that acts infallibly. Just as in the physical world, gravity does not choose whom it affects. The law of mental creation neither favors nor arbitrarily punishes. Thought is cause and form is effect. There is no exception to this rule, for the mind is the mold through which invisible substance takes form in the material world. This means that every condition in an individual's life is the direct result of the patterns of thought they have held, consciously or unconsciously. The error of superstition has been to believe that man's destiny is determined by external forces, whether divine or worldly. Throughout history, humanity has invented belief systems in which fortune, the favor of gods, or chance play a decisive role in life. But none of this has any foundation in the universal law. If the universe operated arbitrarily, without defined principles, then knowledge would be useless and human effort meaningless. However, the progress of civilization has shown otherwise. Every lasting structure, every work of greatness, and every personal achievement have been the result of the conscious application of principles that govern reality. When the world is observed with intelligence, it is discovered that everything is governed by exact correspondences. The seed of an oak cannot give rise to another species of tree, nor can the thought of failure produce success. Every cause carries within itself the seed of its corresponding effect, and thought is no exception to this rule. What a person holds in their mind with clarity and conviction must necessarily take form in their experience. The mistake of those who do not understand this law is that they allow their thoughts to fluctuate without direction, generating contradictory mental patterns that produce scattered and disharmonious results. If an architect designed a structure without precise measurements, the resulting building would be defective and unstable. In the same way, one who does not discipline their thought cannot expect their life to reflect order and success. The correspondence between thought and reality is not an abstract principle, but a mathematical law as exact as any numerical equation. Here lies the greatest power man can possess, the ability to think with intention and knowledge of the law when he understands that his mind is the point of contact between universal intelligence and the world of form. He stops considering his thoughts as mere passing occurrences and begins to treat them as the blueprints that shape his destiny. He no longer lives at the mercy of circumstances, but assumes his role as a conscious creator, knowing that the universe responds with absolute precision to the nature of his sustained thought. Superstition dissolves before the understanding that there are no mysteries in creation, only laws waiting to be discovered and applied. It is not a matter of blind faith or uncertain hope, but of exact knowledge and application of the principles that govern mind and reality. Just as a scientist does not need to believe in electricity for it to work, man does not need irrational faith for the law of the mind to operate in his life. It is enough to understand the relationship between mental cause and effect, to exercise mastery over existence. Whoever learns to use their thought with precision leaves uncertainty behind. They no longer ask whether their desire will manifest, but know that the law, when applied correctly, must produce its effect with the same certainty with which fire generates heat. The key is not in the strength of desire, nor in the intensity of emotion, but in the clarity and continuity of thought directed toward a defined purpose. This is the great truth many have overlooked. Life is not a mystery nor a matter of chance, but an exact equation between what a man thinks and what he experiences. Whoever understands this principle stops depending on intermediaries, stops waiting for external miracles, and assumes their role as co-creator with the universal mind. God does not intervene arbitrarily in the life of man. God acts through the law, and the law responds to the direction of the mind. Here begins true freedom, when man understands that his destiny is not in the hands of external circumstances, but in how he uses his own thought. In the following chapters, we will explore how this law can be applied with greater precision to consciously and deliberately transform life, rather than allowing conditions to be determined by wandering, uncontrolled thought. Whoever learns to govern their mind learns to govern their world. Chapter 6. Religion and its deviation from true knowledge. Since the earliest times, man has felt the need to explain his existence in relation to a higher cause. The awareness that there is a principle underlying all manifestation has been present in all civilizations, and from this perception arose what we today call religion. But over time, what was originally a path to knowledge and union with the universal mind became a rigid system of belief, where dogma replaced understanding and fear took the place of certainty. The purpose of religion, in its purest conception, was never to establish arbitrary rules, nor to erect structures of mediation between man and God. Its initial function was to instruct the individual in the laws that govern mind and creation, allowing him to understand his relationship with supreme intelligence and his ability to manifest reality through thought. However, the truth was distorted, and instead of teaching man that he himself is the vehicle of divine expression, the idea was instilled that he was a weak creature, dependent on the will of external powers. This was the greatest error in history, to turn God into an unreachable dogma, a distant entity to be feared and worshipped rather than understood and manifested in everyday experience. Instead of showing man that the kingdom of God is within him, he was made to believe he must seek it outside. He was taught to beg, to obey without understanding, to submit to rules imposed by others, when in reality the universal law has never demanded submission, but knowledge. If religion had maintained its original purpose, the world today would not be divided by creeds and doctrinal disputes, but all men would understand that God is not a distant figure, but the principle operating in their own mind. There would be no need for temples of stone, because every individual would know that the only true temple is their own consciousness. There would be no sacrifices or penances, because man would know that the only true offering he can make to God is the correct use of his thought and action. Ancient scriptures contain fragments of this truth, but they have been interpreted through the lens of fear and control. The words of great spiritual masters have been distorted to serve human interests rather than to be understood as universal principles. Christ never taught blind submission, but mastery of the mind over matter. His words were, "According to your faith be it unto you," which means that the reality of each individual is the reflection of their inner belief. I do not speak of a capricious God who decides who prospers and who suffers, but of a law that responds with exactness to the thought and intention of the individual. The great truths of existence have been cloaked in mysticism and separated from reason, when in fact the knowledge of God is the highest science. Understanding the universal law requires no rituals or esoteric formulas, but a clear mind willing to see beyond imposed tradition and to discover that divine power is not in institutions nor dogmas, but in the consciousness of each human being. True religion is not a set of external rules, but a path of self-discovery and conscious application of the universal law. Its purpose is not to instill fear or establish hierarchies, but to reveal that God and man are one in essence, and that thought is the link between the invisible and the manifested. But how can this knowledge be restored in a humanity conditioned to dependence and submission? The only way is through understanding. There is no need to destroy religions or fight their structures, but to transcend the mistaken interpretation and recover the principle underlying them all. The man who understands that his mind is the vehicle of the universal mind no longer needs intermediaries to approach God, because he knows he has never been separated from him. He depends on no external rites or mechanical prayers, because he recognizes that his thought is the true prayer, and that every affirmation held with certainty is an order given to the universal substance. In the following chapters, we will explore how this understanding is not a philosophical theory or abstract concept, but a living and operative law that can be applied in daily life. God is not a mystery to be worshipped from afar. He is the supreme intelligence expressed through every conscious being. When this is understood, religion ceases to be a system of beliefs and becomes an exact science of manifestation and mastery over existence. Chapter 7. The relationship between faith and mental science. The term faith has been misunderstood and degraded over the centuries, becoming an idea of submission and blind acceptance of dogmas that the individual neither questions nor comprehends. It has been taught that faith means believing without seeing, trusting without understanding, and hoping without acting. However, this is not the true nature of faith. Faith is not ignorance nor submission, but applied knowledge. In its purest essence, faith is the absolute certainty in the immutable operation of the universal law. It is not a vague feeling of hope, but the deep conviction that thought, when held clearly and without contradiction, must produce its equivalent in reality. Faith is not blind. On the contrary, it is the highest form of vision, for it allows the individual to see beyond appearances and recognize the fundamental truth that the universal mind responds with mathematical precision to the direction of the individual mind. Humanity's error has been to consider faith as a tool of supplication instead of a tool of creation. It has been taught that man must have faith in an external power that, by its mysterious will decide whether or not to grant what has been asked. But true faith is not passive. It is active. It is not waiting for something to happen from the outside, but knowing with certainty that the universe has no choice but to respond to the nature of the thought held with conviction. Here lies the inseparable relationship between faith and mental science. Mental science is the understanding that thought is the primary cause of all manifestation, and faith is the attitude of absolute certainty in the operation of this law. They are not separate concepts, but two sides of the same reality. He who has faith applies mental science, and he who applies mental science develops faith. The interaction between the individual mind and the universal mind is the mechanism by which faith becomes a creative force. The individual's mind is not an isolated system, but a stream of expression of supreme intelligence, just as a water channel has no independent existence apart from the river it flows from. The human mind is nothing more than a channel through which the universal mind individualizes in conscious experience. Faith is the recognition of this truth, the assurance that there is no separation between the supreme cause and human thought. When the individual understands that his mind is the tool through which the creative principle manifests in his life, he stops considering faith as supplication and embraces it as operational certainty. He no longer doubts whether his thoughts will have effect, but knows that by holding them with intention and clarity, he activates the very process by which all visible things have been brought into existence. Faith is the understanding that the law responds infallibly, without exception or favoritism. This is why those who have achieved great things in history were not necessarily the most talented or fortunate, but those who possessed absolute certainty in the outcome of their thought. They did not allow themselves to doubt, knowing that doubt is the force that neutralizes creation. They understood that the universe does not respond to uncertainty or contradiction, but to the firmness of a mind that admits no other possibility than the manifestation of what it has conceived. This is where the correct understanding of faith becomes the key to shaping reality. It is not a matter of praying or waiting for a miracle, but of aligning the mind with the law and acting accordingly. A person with faith needs no external signs or prior confirmations because their conviction guarantees the outcome. They do not wait for circumstances to change to believe, but believe first, and in that belief, create the necessary conditions for their thought to take form. This principle has been misunderstood in many spiritual teachings. To believe is to see, and not to see is to believe. Whoever waits for external evidence before accepting a truth hinders the operation of the law, for the law does not respond to passive waiting, but to thought held with absolute certainty. Just as an architect designs a building in his mind before it is built, and does not doubt that the structure will be erected according to his plan, the individual who understands mental science uses his faith to build in the invisible substance of thought before the material form appears. He needs no external proof because his assurance in the law is sufficient. He does not wait but knows. He does not doubt but affirms. And it is precisely this certainty that makes his thought become reality. The error of traditional religion has been to separate faith from reason, turning it into an act of dependence rather than an act of mastery. True faith is not irrational, but the conscious application of universal law. Whoever understands this stops seeking answers outside of himself and recognizes that the key to all manifestation lies in his own ability to hold a thought with absolute conviction. In the following chapters, we will explore how this certainty can be practically cultivated so that faith is not an abstract concept, but a tool of absolute power in creating reality. Faith is not belief in something uncertain. It is the science of thought applied with accuracy and without hesitation. Whoever learns to use it learns to master his world. Chapter 8. The Illusion of Separation and its Overcoming. The greatest obstacle humanity has faced in understanding the truth is the belief in the separation between man and God. This idea has been the foundation upon which systems of thought have been built that limit the individual, depriving him of the knowledge of his true nature. He has been taught that he is a finite entity, separate from the universal principle, a created being who must plead to an external power for his well-being, instead of recognizing that he himself is the individualized expression of the Supreme Mind. God is not a distant entity or a being who dwells in an inaccessible realm. God is the principle of being, the universal intelligence that gives existence to all things. There are not two separate realities. The Creator and the creation are one and the same in essence, though manifested in different degrees of expression. The same force that organizes the stars, structures life in its tiniest form, and sustains the balance of the cosmos is the one that operates in the mind of the individual. There can be no separation between cause and effect, between the source and its manifestation. The human mind is not an isolated system, but the channel through which the universal mind individualizes and experiences itself in form. The error of separation arises when man identifies his existence with his physical form, forgetting that his true essence is not the body he inhabits, but the intelligence that animates it. The body is merely the vehicle, the mind is the eternal reality. If an individual sees himself as a creature separated from the whole, he condemns himself to live in powerlessness and dependence, waiting for something outside himself to intervene on his behalf. But when he understands that his mind is an extension of the universal mind, his perception changes completely, and with it, his experience of life. This recognition of unity is the key to conscious manifestation. If man thinks he is separated from the source of all power, he will act as if his ability to create is limited, as if he needs the approval of an external force to alter his reality. But the thinker who understands that he is one with the Supreme Mind knows there is no barrier between his thought and its manifestation. He does not wait but affirms. He does not doubt but directs his intention with absolute certainty because he knows that the law of thought is the same law that governs the entire universe. The only difference between those who experience abundance and those who live in scarcity is not a matter of luck or external circumstances, but of consciousness. The individual who recognizes his unity with universal intelligence knows that his thought is the cause of his reality, while one who believes in separation assumes his life is determined by forces beyond his control. The difference between the wise and the ignorant is not in their ability, but in their perception of truth. Just as light and heat are inseparable from the sun, the human mind is inseparable from the universal mind. There can be no existence outside the source of life, nor can there be thought without the substance upon which it acts. Every idea held in the individual mind is its movement within the infinite field of supreme intelligence, and therefore has the power to attract its corresponding manifestation. But this truth can only be fully applied when the illusion of separation has been completely dissolved. As long as the individual continues to believe that God is something external to him, that the creative power is something to be obtained rather than something already possessed, his thought will be limited and his experience will reflect that limitation. The law cannot operate in his favor until he recognizes it as part of his being. The human mind is the access point to universal intelligence. There is no other way, no other account, no other connection. Union with the supreme principle is not established through rituals or external supplications, but through thought directed with knowledge and certainty. When man understands that his mind is the instrument through which the universal mind expresses itself, he stops seeking outside what has always been within. This is the great revelation that frees the individual from uncertainty and fear. Power is not in something outside himself, but in his own capacity to think with intention and mastery. When this is understood and applied, all concept of limitation disappears, for the thinker no longer sees himself as a separate being, but as the conscious channel through which infinite intelligence takes form in existence. Here is where true mastery over life begins, not in the accumulation of theoretical knowledge, but in the absolute certainty that God and man are one reality at different levels of expression, not in the belief that creative power is far away, but in the recognition that the individual mind is the center through which the supreme mind acts without restrictions. In the following chapters, it will be explored how this understanding allows absolute control over external conditions, for whoever recognizes their unity with the source of all power ceases to be a spectator in their life and becomes its conscious architect. The illusion of separation has been the greatest deception in the history of humanity, but when it is dissolved, man takes his rightful place as the creator of his destiny, depending on nothing but knowledge and application of the law. Chapter 9. The Principle of Correspondence between the Invisible and the Visible. The manifestation of every material form is the result of an invisible process. Nothing exists in the world of experience without first having its origin in the substance of thought. Just as the architect conceives a structure in his mind before the first foundation stone is laid, so too every condition in a man's life is the consequence of a cause established in the realm of the unseen. The visible is only the shadow cast by what has already been formulated in thought. This principle is immutable and operates with mathematical precision. There are no effects without causes, nor any external circumstance that has not been preceded by an idea that generated it. Thought is the matrix of form, and the universal substance responds precisely to the nature of the mental image held with conviction. Here lies the fundamental connection between the invisible and the visible. The mind is not an insignificant mechanism in the individual's existence, but the primary agent of his destiny. One who understands this ceases to regard his reality as the product of external forces and recognizes that every aspect of his life is an exact reflection of the contents of his mind. There are no accidents or mysteries in creation. Everything follows the law of correspondence, according to which the external world is the mirror of the mental patterns sustained in consciousness. But how does this process of transforming the invisible into the visible occur? The mechanics of mental creation in everyday life follow a precise order. It all begins with an idea conceived in the mind, which, when held with clarity and conviction, impresses its mold upon the universal substance. This substance, being the medium through which the Supreme Mind manifests on the plane of form, invariably responds to the direction it receives. It does not act arbitrarily nor possess a will of its own. It is neutral and only reflects what the mind projects upon it. Just as the earth does not select which seeds will germinate on its surface, but causes any seed deposited upon it to sprout, the universal substance does not judge the nature of the thought it receives, but merely reproduces it in the world of form. This is the principle that explains why both good and evil can manifest with equal ease in a man's experience. It is not that the law favors some and punishes others. It is that each individual receives exactly what he sows in his mind. This truth is evident in all aspects of life. He who cultivates thoughts of fear, scarcity, and illness will inevitably see those conditions reflected in his reality, not because there is a predetermined destiny forcing those experiences upon him, but because his own mind has issued the command for those manifestations to take form. Likewise, whoever maintains thoughts of harmony, success, and well-being will experience in his life the corresponding manifestations of those ideas. Recognition of this principle is what turns the thinker into the creator of his destiny. Until man understands his relationship with the universal mind, he will live like a leaf carried by the wind, subject to external influences, without direction or control over his life. But when the truth awakens that his thought is the primary cause of all he experiences, he gains conscious mastery over his existence. Here lies the secret of true transformation. No change is possible in an individual's life without a change in his thought. Any attempt to modify external conditions without first altering the mental cause that produced them is doomed to failure, for the visible is only a reflection of the invisible, and a reflection cannot change unless the image that causes it changes first. The man who understands this ceases to be a victim of circumstances and assumes his role as the architect of his own reality. He no longer waits for the outer world to adjust to his desires, but rather adjusts his thought to the image of what he wishes to manifest, knowing that the law of correspondence will infallibly act in his favor. He is not influenced by the appearance of present things, because he knows that what he sees today is only the result of past thoughts, and that the future will depend solely on the ideas he chooses to hold in his mind now. Just as the sculptor works with raw stone to give it the form he has conceived in his imagination, the individual who applies this knowledge molds his destiny with the precision of a master. There is no chance in creation, only thought directed with intention and purpose. In the following chapters, it will be explored how this principle can be applied more effectively to ensure that the individual's mind becomes the conscious manifestation tool of the reality he wishes to experience. The thinker is not a spectator in existence, but the center of power through which the Supreme Mind expresses itself in the world of form. Whoever recognizes this truth and applies it with knowledge will govern his destiny with absolute certainty. Chapter 10. The Purpose of Life and the Development of Consciousness. All existence has a purpose. Nothing in the universe has been created without a reason for being, and nothing exists without being subject to the law that governs it. At the center of this great structure of order and precision is man, a being who not only participates in creation, but has also been endowed with the capacity to understand and direct it. The purpose of life is not mere survival, nor submission to predetermined conditions. It is the development of consciousness, the expansion of thought, and mastery over one's own existence. The reason man has been given a mind is so that through it he may know and exercise the law of creation. While other forms of life in nature exist within a pattern of automatic functioning, man has been invested with the faculty to think consciously, to imagine, to reason, and to choose. This is not an incidental trait, but the very essence of his purpose. Through thought, the individual has the power to shape his reality, modify his environment, and transcend any limitation imposed by ignorance. Thought is not a fleeting phenomenon, nor a biological function without significance. It is the tool through which the universal mind expresses itself in individuality. Every idea conceived with intention is an act of creation, a manifestation of the divine principle in action, and it is through the expansion of thought that man advances in his spiritual development. The evolution of consciousness is a natural process, an immutable law that drives the human being towards greater understanding of himself and his relationship with the first cause. It is not a sudden event, nor a privilege granted to a few. It is a progressive expansion of knowledge in which each new level of understanding opens the door to even higher levels of perception and power. But this growth does not happen automatically. Just as muscles do not strengthen without use, the mind does not expand without conscious effort. Each individual is responsible for his own development, for the awakening of understanding is an act of will, not a fate imposed from outside. This process of evolution begins when man stops accepting reality as fixed and unchangeable and begins to question the nature of his existence, when he asks who he is, what his purpose is, and what the relationship is between his thought and his destiny. He begins the path toward mastery of life. Ignorance is merely the state in which the mind operates without knowledge of the law. It is not a permanent condition nor an inherent trait of man, but simply the lack of recognition of his own creative nature. The awakening of understanding is therefore true liberation. There is no greater slavery than that of a limited thought that sees external circumstances as the cause of its condition. But when the individual understands that his mind is the key to his destiny, ignorance dissolves and freedom manifests. He no longer sees himself as a creature subject to chance or forces beyond his control, but as a creative agent, a channel through which the supreme mind takes form in the world. The purpose of life, then, is not merely to exist, but to expand consciousness to the point where the separation between man and the universal mind disappears completely. In this state, the thinker no longer perceives himself as a limited being, but as the conscious expression of the creative principle. He no longer seeks answers outside himself because he has understood that the only truth lies in the law operating within his own mind. This knowledge is not theory nor philosophical speculation. It is the immutable reality of existence. One who understands this does not need to wait for external signs to confirm his power because his certainty in the law is sufficient. He knows that the universe has no choice but to respond to the direction of his thought, for that is the fundamental structure of creation. In the following chapters, it will be explored how this development of consciousness allows one to reach a level of absolute mastery over life, where man ceases to be a victim of circumstances and becomes the conscious creator of his destiny. Ignorance is the only barrier that separates man from his power, and knowledge is the key that frees him. The path to fulfillment is not in the accumulation of wealth nor in external recognition, but in the certainty that the mind is the center of all power, and its correct direction is the secret of all manifestation. Chapter 11. The Mind as a Tool of Transformation. All transformation in an individual's life begins in the mind. There is no other possible path, for the mind is the only channel through which reality can be modified. It is not circumstance that determines a man's condition, but the interpretation his mind makes of it, and the response it generates within him. The external world is merely a reflection of the patterns of thought sustained in consciousness. The practical use of mental science is neither an abstract concept nor an exercise in philosophical speculation. It is the precise application of the universal law that states that whatever the thinker holds with certainty in his mind must manifest in his experience. This principle is neither selective nor admits exceptions. It is always in operation, whether the individual understands it or not. Just as gravity does not cease to act because someone ignores its existence, the law of the mind does not stop producing effects according to the established mental causes. The great difference between the man who lives in uncertainty and the one who exercises mastery over his destiny lies in the knowledge of this law and its conscious application. The former allows his mind to operate disorderly, letting external influences and acquired habits determine the course of his thought. The latter, however, understands that the direction of his life depends on the direction of his mind, and therefore disciplines his thoughts so they align with the reality he wishes to manifest. Here lies the key to all transformation. It is not a matter of waiting for external conditions to change in order to think differently, but of changing thought first with the certainty that the external form will inevitably adjust to the new mental image. This is the error of those who try to change their lives without changing their thinking. They seek to alter the reflection without changing the image that generates it. But the law of the mind does not allow such contradiction. The knowledge of the law enables the modification of existence because it grants the individual the power to direct his thought with intention and purpose. One who understands that his mind is the mold through which reality takes shape stops considering his thoughts as mere random occurrences without importance and treats them as orders that will shape his destiny. He does not think randomly, but with the precision of an architect who designs his work with clarity and certainty. This is the point where conscious direction of thought becomes the most powerful instrument of transformation. The thinker cannot afford dispersion or doubt because he knows that his mind is the tool through which universal intelligence responds. He does not seek external proof before believing because he understands that belief is the cause and manifestation is the effect. He is not influenced by appearances because he knows they are only shadows of past thoughts and that his future depends solely on the charity of the thoughts he sustains now. Mental science teaches that there are no limits to the transformation of an individual's life except those he himself sets with his thinking. Any change is possible when the mind is directed precisely, because the law responds to conviction and not doubt. It is not the strength of desire that determines manifestation, but the clarity of the mental image and the persistence with which it is held in consciousness. The mistake of most is that they allow their thoughts to oscillate between certainty and uncertainty. One day they believe in their power, and the next they doubt its effectiveness. With this wavering, all they achieve is to neutralize their creative capacity. But the thinker who has understood the nature of the law knows that his reality is the exact result of his mental state, and therefore maintains absolute firmness in the direction of his thought. Just as a sailor adjusts the course of his ship and keeps the helm steady until reaching his destination, the individual who applies mental science must keep his mind aligned with his goal until reality responds. No matter what obstacles may arise along the way, he knows they are only the result of old mental conditions still in the process of dissipating. What has been conceived in the mind must find expression in form because that is the immutable law of creation. In the following chapters, it will be explored how this knowledge can be used to achieve absolute mastery over life, eliminating uncertainty and establishing the certainty that a correctly directed mind is the only factor determining an individual's destiny. There is no other cause, no other power. He who governs his thought governs his existence. Chapter 12. The Future of Man and the Expansion of Knowledge. The evolution of man is not merely a biological phenomenon, nor a simple progression in the material realm. True evolution is the expansion of his thinking, the transformation of his consciousness toward a higher understanding. Every advance in the history of humanity has been preceded by a change in the way the individual thinks. No invention, no social revolution, nor scientific discovery has occurred without someone first conceiving the possibility of a different reality in their mind. Thought precedes form, and the evolution of humanity is nothing more than the progressive manifestation of the development of the mind. As man has advanced in his knowledge, he has left behind many erroneous beliefs, those that kept him bound to ignorance and fear. However, he still remains a prisoner of the most limiting idea of all, the belief in his own powerlessness. Despite progress in the material world, most still see themselves as victims of circumstances, believing their destiny is determined by external factors instead of recognizing that their mind is the sole cause of their reality. The future of man is tied not to his capacity to master the external world, but to his capacity to master his own mind. No matter how great his technological advances, how sophisticated his creations, or how vast his knowledge of the physical universe, if he does not understand that true power resides in his thought and in the application of the universal law, he will remain a slave to his own limitations. Real progress is not measured in terms of accumulated wealth or material laurels, but in the expansion of consciousness and the individual's ability to direct his life with knowledge and certainty. History has shown that the most advanced civilizations were those in which thought reached a greater understanding of the relationship between man and the law governing creation. Likewise, those societies that denied the importance of thought fell into decay, for an external world built without a solid mental foundation cannot sustain itself. For this reason, the key to humanity's future lies not in the accumulation of information, but in the application of knowledge. It is not enough to know that the mind is the center of creation. This knowledge must be used deliberately to shape reality according to the law. Mastery of thought is the only path to true freedom, and without mental freedom, all progress is superficial. The greatest obstacle to this evolution is the persistence of erroneous beliefs passed down from generation to generation, limiting the individual's perception of his own power. The idea that man is a weak being, separate from the universal mind and subject to forces beyond his control, has been the greatest impediment to his development. He has lived believing that his destiny is something that happens to him, instead of understanding that his destiny is something he creates with every thought sustained in his mind. The need to abandon these self-imposed limits is urgent. There is no real barrier between the individual and his creative power except the one he has established by believing in separation. Every time someone claims they cannot change their life, that their situation is unchangeable, or that success is reserved only for a few, they are reaffirming the same ignorance that has kept humanity in mental slavery for centuries. But who frees themselves from these beliefs and understands that their thought is the key to their destiny? They begin to live with a level of certainty that places them above all limitation. The future of man is therefore the future of his thought. There will be no change in humanity without a change in the perception of its own nature. Those who awaken to the truth of their unity with the universal mind will be the pioneers of a new era in which knowledge of the law replaces superstition and mastery of thought becomes the foundation of all creation. The external world will not change by itself. It will change when the mind of the individual is elevated to its true state of power. This is humanity's destiny: to shed all erroneous beliefs and assume absolute mastery over its own reality. There is no longer room for ignorance or dependence on external factors. The conscious thinker is the architect of the future, and his greatest tool is the understanding that the mind is the only cause of all that exists. The final chapter will explore how the full realization of this truth allows the culmination of the transformation process in which the individual ceases to identify with limitation and recognizes himself as the conscious manifestation of the Supreme Mind in action. The future is not uncertain. It is the exact result of the thought we hold today. Chapter 13. The realization of the self as an expression of God. Every quest, every restlessness of thought, every exploration of knowledge has one single destination: the recognition of the unity between the thinker and the universal mind. There is no higher goal nor greater revelation than the absolute certainty that man is not a being separate from God, but his individualized expression in the realm of form. This understanding marks the culmination of comprehension, the point at which the individual ceases to see himself as a limited entity and begins to recognize himself as a conscious extension of supreme intelligence. The purpose of existence is not the accumulation of external achievements nor the satisfaction of fleeting desires, but the awakening of consciousness to its true identity. All suffering, all struggle, and all uncertainty originate from ignorance of this truth. The man who believes himself alone in the universe, separated from his source, lives in fear, lack, and confusion. But the man who has recognized his unity with the universal mind lives with certainty, mastery, and power, for he knows his existence is not the product of chance but the manifestation of infinite intelligence. Transcendence of limitation does not occur through physical effort nor through struggle against external conditions. It occurs through a change in perception. When the thinker ceases to identify with his temporary form and recognizes that his real being is consciousness itself, the eternal I am that exists beyond time and space, this is the great affirmation that dissolves every barrier. For when the individual says with full knowledge, I am, he is declaring his unity with the source of all life. He does not say, I was, nor I will be, because the I am is the only absolute reality, the eternal present in which the Supreme Mind expresses itself through every conscious being. Ignorance has led man to seek God outside of himself, to worship him as a distant entity, and to conceive him as something foreign to his own existence. But true spirituality is not about seeking God. It is about recognizing that he has never been absent. There is no path to travel nor distance to overcome, because the universal mind has never ceased to be present in every thought, every act, every manifestation of life. This understanding is what gives the individual absolute mastery over his destiny. He no longer stumbles because he knows there is nothing outside of himself that can grant him what he already possesses by divine right. He no longer doubts because he understands that the law responds precisely to his thought. He no longer fears because he has transcended the illusion of separation and recognized his unity with the first cause of all things. The true nature of man is not that of a fragile being destined for struggle and suffering. It is that of a conscious creator, an extension of the supreme principle, manifesting in his own experience the very intelligence that sustains the entire universe. When the individual understands this, his life ceases to be governed by chance and becomes a deliberate manifestation of thought directed with knowledge. He no longer feels like an effect of external forces, but the cause that shapes his existence. This is the final state of the evolution of consciousness, when man recognizes himself as the expression of God in action, not as a separate being, not as an intermediary between heaven and earth, but as the point where the invisible becomes visible, the channel through which supreme intelligence experiences itself in the world of form. There is nothing more to achieve, nothing more to learn beyond this truth. The I Am is the only eternal reality, the foundation of all creation, the center of absolute power. Everything man has sought throughout his existence has essentially been the recognition of this identity. The day he understands this, his quest ends, his doubt disappears, and his power manifests without limits. Thus concludes this treatise, not with the promise of an uncertain future, but with the affirmation of an eternal truth. Man is God's thought made conscious of itself, and when he fully recognizes this, nothing is impossible for him. Amen.